This is Intelligence Matters, sponsored by Ginkgo Biosecurity, whose cutting-edge biological intelligence platform empowers national security decision-makers to identify and respond to emerging biological threats.
Beth Sanner is a career CIA analyst. She worked on a wide variety of issues during her career. She was a presidential briefer, and she concluded her career as a deputy director of national intelligence as the intelligence community's top analyst. I think she is one of the best analysts of global developments that I know. Beth joins us today to talk about a range of national security issues facing the United States. We'll be right back with that discussion after a quick break. I'm Michael Morrell, and this is Intelligence Matters.
Biosecurity matters. What's biosecurity? It's the mission-critical industry safeguarding against 21st century biological threats. Biology doesn't respect borders. Ginkgo Biosecurity monitors critical assets and produces actionable biointelligence for national security decision-makers confronting biological threats, whether they are natural, accidental, or malicious. Ginkgo's technology tracks deadly pathogens worldwide, and our globally scaled platform, the first of its kind, detects outbreaks in near real time, deploys AI-powered threat assessments, and identifies the source of a threat, mitigating outbreaks before they become national emergencies. When lives and livelihoods are on the line, every second counts. Ginkgo Biosecurity, the biosecurity partner for an uncertain new era. Learn more at biosecuritymatters.com.
Beth, welcome to Intelligence Matters. It's great to have you on the show.
I'm really happy to be here, Michael. I've been looking forward to this for a while. It's about time you've had me on.
I think this is going to be fun. And it is about time I had you on. I agree 100%. Beth, I want to talk about the Middle East. I want to talk about Ukraine. I was hoping to talk about China too, but I think that's way too much for 40 minutes. But I also do want to talk because so many of my listeners are young national security professionals. So many of them are college and university students who are interested in a career in national security. So I want to spend a little time talking about how you got to the national security community and what your path was like inside. So the Middle East, and maybe we'll do your career in the middle, and then we'll go to Ukraine and finish out that way. So a nice story sandwiched by two not so nice stories. So let's start with the Middle East, and I jotted down some context here. Number one, Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th was among the worst terrorist attacks in modern history, both in scope, size, and in brutality, I think. Number two, Israel responded aggressively. The IDF says it's struck over 30,000 targets in Gaza from the air. This is a place that's 142 square miles. So when you do the math, it's over 200 airstrikes per square mile in Gaza. It's massive. And they've also, of course, sent in thousands of troops. They've come and gone, but at one time, tens of thousands of troops. Hamas has suffered 20,000 casualties, a little over 10,000 deaths and 10,000 injuries. But as everyone knows, civilians are suffering as well in multiple ways. Casualties, lack of food, lack of water, lack of shelter. It's among the worst humanitarian disasters that we've seen. The war has spilled over to the West Bank that is simmering. It's kind of remarkable that it hasn't, blown up. And it's simmered over to Iran and its proxies. Recently that spread has included a large Iranian attack on Israel, the first direct attack ever on Israel by Iran. With Israel and several of its partners providing a robust defense to that attack. Now we're waiting for the next moment, right? We're waiting for another ceasefire, a second ceasefire, or we're waiting for an Israeli attack on Rafah, or we're waiting for more waiting, right? We just don't know at this moment. We're taping this on Monday afternoon. It's going to run on Wednesday, so a lot may change between then and now. And so that's the context kind of where we are. Do you want to add to that? Do you want to dispute any of it?
So I think first, the beginning framing of this conversation is absolutely correct. And I think it's really important for our listeners, for all of us speaking about this, to always be setting the stage. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It wrought untold devastation and suffering. The offensive in response has wrought untold suffering. Both communities are traumatized. And we, as former leaders or current thought leaders, whatever we are, I think we have to be showing the way of talking about this in that balanced manner, and being able to hold in our head two thoughts: that Hamas is a terrorist organization and innocent people are suffering. Right. And so that's, to me, always the human aspect of this. We cannot lose our humanity. We cannot dehumanize the enemy, or the non-combatants that are involved. The second thing I guess I would say is that a lot has changed in the Middle East since October 7th. Right? Norms, the way that the war has been fought there, it's different now. And things aren't going to ever probably be exactly the same ever again. Right? So, Hamas never expected to do what it did. Total intel failure there. Okay. Iran, with this axis of resistance, unprecedented in the nature, the expansion of the war, Houthis taking on the international community, and Iran and Israel attacking each other directly, kinetically, directly, in a military fashion, not a one-off assassination. These are all really different things. But last thing I'll say, the one thing that hasn't changed, and I think is so important to the future of the Middle East, is that through all of this, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have not ended ties with Israel, and they still want or enjoy normalization. And that part of it is really key. But there's a lot at stake for the United States in the Middle East right now. And I think it's really important for us to understand that U.S. interests and Israeli interests have commonalities, like a Venn diagram in the middle there, but we have a lot of different interests as well.
Yeah. Beth, I love your two thoughts, in your mind at the same time, and they're not being inconsistent, right? I agree with you on Hamas as a terrorist group. Palestinians are suffering, both of those thoughts. I would also say, what Hamas did on October 7th was pure evil. You can believe that, right?
Yeah,
and you can also believe that the Palestinians have gotten the short end of the stick for the last 3 decades, right? You can believe both of those things.
It is so complex, and I think it takes a lot of listening and learning and reflection to get even close to right here. And I'm still listening and learning.
Yeah. And in terms of your point about so much has changed in the Middle East in the last 6 months, absolutely right. And I would expect more to change, right? There's going to be other norms to fall, and we just don't have a full understanding of what those are going to be. Who would have thought that Iran would directly attack Israel, 6 months ago?
Right.
We would have said, no way is that going to happen. But that norm fell.
Exactly.
What else might happen?
Well, I think we didn't talk about the northern border between Israel and Lebanon, where we have, this kind of still escalating tit for tat. It's gone up and down, but we're on another up here. 40 rockets just this past weekend. People killed. So we still have 60 to 80,000 Israelis displaced from that northern border. So in my mind, there's no way Israel or Israelis, and let's not make this just Netanyahu's war. Let's understand that Israelis are very much on the same page in terms of the threat perceptions that they have. They can't go back to their homes. And so Israel is not going to let that stand. one of the things that's at stake right now with this negotiation with Hamas is that the U.S. is hoping that we can get that on a good state, flow aid in, and then deal with the northern border and try to have a diplomatic solution. Because without a diplomatic solution on that northern border, Israel is going to be the one that attacks, in my view. They've got to push them back.
I agree with that, Beth. And I think the question for me is not whether they'll do it. The question for me is how big will it be? Will it be just pushing Hezbollah back so people can return to their homes? Or will it be, do we do what we can to degrade Hezbollah significantly so they can't do to us what Hamas did on October 7th? That's the question in my mind.
Absolutely. And I agree completely. And if they could do the latter, I think they would, unless there are, the externalities that prevent them from doing that. One being, are they militarily capable of doing that? Two is, are they militarily capable of doing that without the U.S.? Because this administration's not going to join in on a war against Hezbollah. And three, what does Israel think of its ability to manage all of that from Iran as well? So, big questions.
Yeah, my sense is that there's a consensus in the war cabinet and in the broader cabinet about doing the minimal operations so that Israelis can return home. I think there's differences of opinion on the bigger operation to degrade Hezbollah. So there's not agreement on that within the war cabinet, is my sense.
Yes.
But what's driving it is not that the war aims, Israel's war aims are, disarm Hamas, destroy Hamas, and get the hostages back. The war aim is really returning to a sense of security for Israeli citizens. That's the war aim, right? And that's why it may ultimately be broader than just Gaza.
I think it has to be for that reason. And I think this is, one of the reasons why Saudi normalization is still on the table, because they're so important to whatever kind of solution you find to create that sense of security and stability. Because part of that sense of stability also comes from Israel's sense that Iran remains the largest threat. And so, solidifying the relationships in the region are really key to managing that threat in the future.
So as we sit here, there's all sorts of news reports about, is a ceasefire coming? Is it not coming? Is Hamas, bending to Israel's demands? Is Hamas, saying yes to something that Israel doesn't want to say yes to? I don't want to get into all that, right? It's incredibly complicated. But Beth, kind of walk us through what happens if we have a ceasefire of the kind that people are talking about, right? Certain number of days, certain number of hostages released, certain number of Palestinians in prison released. What does the next few months look like with a ceasefire, and then what does the next few months look like without it?
So the reason the administration is so active in seeking this ceasefire is because their entire vision of how in the world you can stabilize the Middle East rests on this very thing. And it is incredibly hard to imagine the way out without starting with a ceasefire, because they need to, and this is domestic politics and regional politics. And I find that one of the most interesting things about this conflict, I'm sorry to say interesting because it's tragic, but just how much and how many countries, not just the United States, are having their domestic politics embroiled by this conflict in a way that Russia, Ukraine never did. And so, without a ceasefire, you have a Rafah operation. I don't think we stop Israel from doing that. And you have more civilian devastation. You mentioned the devastation. We now have 70% of buildings in Gaza destroyed. This one supposedly is going to look more precise, but that is, we're talking decades to try and tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild this place, and more people dead. And that means more protests in the United States. That means domestic politics, the people who are so essential in some of these swing states, going against Biden because of this. And I think we need to understand, but no one here will, that our ability to actually affect Israeli politics has very strong limits. But then, again, the Saudi normalization with Israel, and then maybe some kind of defense deal between the United States and dealing with the Hezbollah. I mean, it's like this is the linchpin, right? This is one of those things that we call in analysis linchpins, right? And if it goes right, everything, has a potential to get to a much better place. But without it, you're in the mires of this war for months and months, and all the implications get worse.
Yeah. Beth, do you have a sense of what the Iranians were thinking in terms of their large, significant, attack on Israel, which was, a first for them? It was stepping away from the whole concept of letting proxies fight their wars. It was a step away from, not bringing the fight to Iran. They had to anticipate an Israeli response. So, any idea? I'm struggling with this, to be honest. What they were thinking.
Well, I think we all are. And you'll see people make arguments on many sides. I am of the opinion, having followed Iran's response to Soleimani, which I would not characterize as just like a
Right.
pinprick, a slap. I think, I view it very much differently, as being quite significant. And we got away with, just by luck and people being very good at their jobs, that 100 people seriously
Yeah,
injured
for sure.
and no one
I agree
dead,
with you
right?
100%.
So I think of this in the same way. I am not at I think that Iran meant and was totally good with killing
too.
Israelis.
Me too.
So like this whole thing, like, oh well, they announced it and they knew and blah blah blah. No, like, yeah, they did that as kind of a way of inoculating themselves. They didn't, necessarily want to destroy Tel Aviv, but you don't send nearly 350 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones all going off at different times with different timelines for how long it will take, all designed to land at the same time. And then the United States, clearly from the press reports saying, yikes, this is hard.
Right.
And we shot down most of the drones and some of the cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, and we had a lot of help. So, no, that was intentional. So what do I think is going on here? We tend to, as Americans, think very much about the external enemy when we're thinking about causality, right? I usually say that there's rarely one
Right.
thing.
Yep.
There's rarely one reason,
Yep.
right? We all say that. The second thing is that domestic things usually outweigh the foreign thing. But we usually don't focus on that as analysts do, but a lot of others don't. So, my first thing is, look, Khamenei's old. We know that there's been talk for a long time of leadership transition. We hear that IRGC is frustrated. They've been frustrated since Soleimani about not striking back harder. So, I think that they're on the ascendancy. They're positioning themselves for an even bigger role when the supreme leader dies. I think this is a lot about IRGC saying, look, they just took out all of our top leadership in the region. I mean, this was a huge, huge strike in Syria. And we should not misunderstand what the Israelis did, and that IRGC was going to do something huge, because they need to deter Israel from doing that kind of thing again. Israel's been on a spree of killing pretty senior
Right.
IRGC
Right.
people. That needs
Yeah.
to stop.
So do you think deterrence has been reestablished on both sides in terms of what the Iranians want to deter and what the Israelis want to deter, or not? It's just hard to say.
Yeah, and I think that we throw around this term, reestablish deterrence, like it is this idea that can be measured, that can be put in a box, and it's like,
Yeah.
check, we've reestablished deterrence, right? I think it's a much more ambiguous
Yes.
and moving target. And it can be temporary, and it can be weak, and it can die in a minute, based on what people say or don't say. I don't think that. I think that right now, uh, Iran and Israel both have no reason to go at it directly. But now, like I said, the norm has been broken, and it will be broken again. I think.
Yeah.
I just don't know when or
for
why.
sure. For sure. Okay, let's switch. We could talk about this forever. A lot of issues we didn't touch on. But let's talk about your career. How'd you end up at CIA?
By accident. I was in a job I was not enjoying, and I went back to my college career office and I said, "Oh my gosh, help me." And they said, "Oh, CIA's interviewing." And I'm like, I don't know about that. I'm not sure I want to, I'm like, this wasn't too long after CIA was mining Nicaraguan harbors, and like, it was a crazy time back then. And I'm like, I think this might not be my cup of tea or my kind of people. And they're like, "Well, you should just go and interview." And I went and I interviewed, and they said, "Well, you could be a case officer, you could be an analyst. What do you want?" First I'm like,
You could do both, right? There's no way that I could, but absolutely you could. You're like one of the few people.
well, a lot of our friends who are DO actually started off as analysts, and so then now they think that they're analysts. And I love each and every one of them.
Me too.
But
Me too.
but anyway, no, I think, I was amazingly aware of my let's say areas for improvement as a young person, and I think fear has saved me a number of times. I always say fear's not good, but I think also, like, a little healthy fear and knowing your weaknesses can save you. And I was not ready at my youthful age to do that. Maybe I was ready later in my life, but I think I cared too much about what people thought of me.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of a discussion with Beth Sanner.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
So you rose from entry-level analyst to the number one analyst in the entire intelligence community. Why? Why did that happen?
I don't know. I really think it's a miracle that no one has fired me during that, because, like,
that thought never even crossed my mind ever.
it did, because we were in Kabul, and I said to you,
I forgot about this.
after some military seniors were quite unhappy with me and our analysis.
Oh, I remember that.
We walked out in the parking lot, and I said, "Michael, if you need to replace me as head of South Asia, I understand." And do you know what you did?
What did I do?
You laughed.
Just like that, probably.
Yeah. And you're like, get in the car. And yeah, so no, I think it's I mean it is a miracle in some ways because I am pretty feisty and I'm pretty direct and I'm pretty truthful and not everybody likes that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
only because I think that also had I think people also knew that I actually cared about doing the right thing and about doing a good job, that they forgave me when I sometimes went a little AWOL on them. But I also had great mentors, you, John McLaughlin, Patty Kinsvater, Jim Clapper.
But yeah, you were feisty, but as you know, when somebody works for you, right, you want them to be honest with you. You want them to tell you exactly what they're thinking. Right? No?
That is the definition of leadership. But we know, and I've personally experienced things that are not that. But that's okay.
So it's a goal. It's a goal. It doesn't happen all the time.
No,
But I know you were.
it should be a
Right.
prerequisite.
Yes, it should be, but it's not, right?
It's not. Let's be
But
honest.
you were that kind of leader, right?
I tried to be.
Yeah.
Tried to be.
So if you worked for yourself, you would be okay with you. That's what I'm saying.
I actually, yes.
That makes sense.
Except that I wouldn't want me working for me because I always like to have balance. But I collect people in my life who are a little on the contrarian side, who are the analysts who are like a little, what's the thing that's different here?
Yeah.
I really appreciate people like that, and I have found that even when people like that aren't right, they've made me think. And I trust them. I want people around me who are gutsy enough to say things that other people aren't going to say. They may save you in circumstances you don't even understand. It may not just be analysis, maybe leadership.
Yeah. So what did you learn about analysis that you would share with young analysts?
You have probably aware of my big kind of I'm against the truth to power mantra, not against calling it like you see it and being bold and confident in disagreeing with policymakers, but I think that this idea of open-mindedness, of being creative, of reading lots of things that don't have to do with just your narrow little slice of the pie, because the key to great analysis is a little bit of imagination. And one of my favorite quotes is from Bob Hutchings, who was chairman of the NIC, and I worked kind of for him, with him, but definitely as a subordinate at the NSC when he was head of East Europe. And his phrase was, without imagination, you can't imagine that a caterpillar can turn into a butterfly. You really have to be thinking a little outside the norm and be willing to throw away your construct, your mental model of what's going on, and understand that you could be wrong or assumption has changed. This idea of constantly being open-minded and challenging yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's exactly right. When I asked you the question, right, I was thinking what I would say. This is one of my real weaknesses, right? When I ask somebody a question, I don't listen to what they say. I think what I would say.
I didn't say anything.
I was thinking, you can't help but making assumptions when you do analysis, but man, you got to be super careful of those assumptions because some number of them are wrong, guaranteed, right? And you got to be open to that. And being open to that is often reflected in sophisticated analysis, coming out the other end.
Right. I think that, one of the best questions to ask somebody is, how could we be wrong? And to literally write down, I call the Hoyer decomposition, right? That you pull apart a big question and you figure out what are your assumptions, and if any, which of these assumptions, if it's wrong or different, how would that change my outcome? And really be thinking about alternatives.
Yeah. One of the questions I like is can you think of getting one report tomorrow that would change everything for you?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right? And if it's
Yeah.
easy to come up with that, man, maybe you shouldn't be so confident in your judgment. I think that's the essence of it at the end of the day, is knowing how fallible the human mind is and how difficult analysis is, because you don't have all the pieces, right? You have very few of them. And so it is really easy to be wrong. And if you understand that, right, you are going to be a really good analyst.
This idea of humility and listening are so important, and it doesn't mean that you're not confident. No one accused me of not being confident in how I deliver, what we think. But as part of that, I also say what we don't know, what our confidence level is. And, I really think and sometimes would articulate how we could be wrong. And one of the things I think that, the reason that I got invited back into the Oval Office with President Trump as his briefer was that I listened. And I admitted when we were wrong. And then it gave me a platform to say with much more assurance and directness when we disagreed.
Yeah. Yeah. And gives you a basis, right, for him to believe you if you admit when you're wrong.
Yes, the whole thing about intelligence analysis and the relationship with customers, policymakers, military, but also with the American people is this, I think, kind of open door of admitting when we're wrong, not waiting for the congressional investigation or the accusations, but to be really forthright about the difficulty of this profession and when we're right and when we're wrong.
So let's switch to Ukraine. Now knowing that you're this amazing analyst, let's switch to Ukraine. And we're at a turning point there, right? Ukrainians for a long period of time went without, U.S. assistance, without U.S. weapon systems, ammunition, etc. The Russians were taking advantage of that, maybe not as much advantage as they would like. That assistance is now flowing again. What's your sense, Beth, of where we are in the battlefield and where we go from here?
Well, I'm sorry you're going to get hate letters on this, because I really think that, we have to be pretty honest about the challenges that Ukraine faces, and I don't expect the policymakers to be beating their chests on this. There's a diplomacy aspect to this, but, um, things are not good. And I heard Jake Sullivan say that Ukraine will be ready to go on to the offensive again in 2025.
Yeah, I saw that.
I hope that's the case because, war is full of friction. As Clausewitz said, it's very hard to predict anything out more than a very short period of time. 2025 is legions from now.
Yeah.
But I think that, the amount of aid, just to be clear, it's not $60 billion for Ukraine. For military, it's almost 14, plus some drawdown authority. So it's not very much. That's a fraction of the 60 billion. It's
Right.
not going to go forever. The Europeans are ramping up, but it's going to be tough. And so I think that right now, what I'm hoping is that the lines are stabilized, and that things are going to set Ukraine up for a place where they are ready, and that they put enough hurt on Russia that Russia is ready for some kind of negotiated solution. But I also would say that there are two sides to this coin. And, Russia is having enormous help, and they're defense industry is ramped up much faster than the West has. So you have, Russia producing, they're on a war footing. They have a war economy, right? And they're producing, tens of times more armaments than they did before the war. They're getting, 2.5 million rounds from North Korea. They're getting ballistic missiles from Korea. They're getting, tens and tens of thousands of drones from Iran. Iran and Russia will probably set up a factory to produce drones inside Russia. And then, of course, China is providing everything except a fully constructed tank in order for Russia's armaments industry as well as making up for their consumer shortfalls. So we have a situation, and they're buying, oil and propping up the economy. Okay, so uh, you know. While we talk about Russia as a thing, right, we can't forget that they are part of an ecosystem now where this axis of whatever you want to call it is working collaboratively to prop Russia up, to put them in the best position possible to win this war. And so, and if they do win, and this is the thing, while I of course want Ukraine to win, I also really, really hope and think our goal should be to be preventing Russia from winning. Because if Russia wins, I'm telling you, all these other conflicts that we have are going to be worse. The Middle East is going to be worse because they're going to have a lot of bandwidth to give Iran sophisticated aircraft, upgrade their missiles, blah, blah, blah. North Korea, better missile technology, space technology, submarine technology, and China, even though we think about China as being more sophisticated than Russia, there are areas that Russia provides to China that are of significance. So this war strategically for us is actually much more strategically important than what's going on in the Middle East.
Manpower is a huge difference. It's armaments, yes, but it's a huge difference in terms of what Russia can bring to the table and what Ukraine can bring to the table.
Yes, and Ukraine is behind the eight ball, unfortunately, on this, and because of the societal difficulties, was slow to get that going. But we were also slow to get them what they needed in the beginning too, because we were self-deterred. So you can point fingers any which way you want. The fact is we are where we are, and it's not great. But that doesn't mean we should throw up our hands and walk away. In fact, quite the opposite, because the implications of Russia winning are huge. And I think that recent comments by President Trump suggest that even he, who has been against providing aid to Russia, is understanding that there's a more nuanced aspect to this issue. So, yeah.
So you think it's still possible for Ukraine to get to a position where at the negotiating table they win, Russia loses?
I do, or at least Russia's not winning, right? But that's not telling Ukraine they need to go to the negotiating table and give up all of the territory that's under Russian control. That is not what I'm talking about. Let's remember that Russia's goal here is to make Ukraine so weak and divided, and ultimately that they will be able to insert in some way that they will be able to control the trajectory of that country so it can never join the West.
Right.
And they're doing it right now by destroying its energy infrastructure and demoralizing its people and wearing it down and wearing us down. So we gotta hang in there, because there's a lot at stake beyond Ukraine, yes, but beyond that as well.
Yeah.
Ukraine's fighting our war for us.
Yeah, and we gave them a security guarantee when they gave up their nuclear weapons. So this is about U.S. credibility too.
Hugely. And that whole Axis idea, this gets to, if they win, it just makes them so strong in order to counter the U.S. role in the world, and the world that, we know and that we are confident in and that guarantees our prosperity and security. And that really is what is at stake. People who say we just need to pivot to China are not getting it. Yes, we have to do that, but we need to be able to, juggle with our hands and our feet and also get our allies to step up and do more.
And we can, right? We can.
We can, and our allies can too.
Yes. We are still the most powerful country in the world, still the largest economy in the world. We can do more than one thing.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
I'm with you.
Beth, thank you so much for joining us. We got to do this regularly, I think. I think we got to tackle the issues of the day regularly here on Intelligence Matters with Beth Sanner. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Michael. You know I'd love to come back.
That was Beth Sanner. I'm Michael Morrell. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry and Sophia Rubin. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.